Hey folks, Amanda here. Just a quick heads up that from time to time, the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast does include some adult language. So if you've got kids with you, you may just want to hold on to this episode to listen to a little later. Enjoy! Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell and the rest of my team here at Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day. I think we can all agree that it feels almost instinctual at times to compare ourselves to the people we see around us. Now, some of that comparison can be helpful, like when we see someone who inspires us, or we recognize expertise that we aspire to have someday. But comparison can also be unhealthy, like when it fuels negative stories, self-talk, and mindsets. In this episode, two of my fellow MJST coaches, Christina Schroeder and Staci Martin, join me to talk about this struggle, our comparison triggers, the strategies we use to work through the negative voices in our heads, and how we determine whether a goal is quote unquote good enough for each of us. At the end of the day, we ascribe to the phrase a client shared in passing recently. You do you. Your goals, your standards, your growth. Here's our thoughts on how to write the story that is uniquely yours and leave the negative comparisons behind. Enjoy. Staci and Christina, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm always so glad when I have you ladies on the podcast with me. So we have a great conversation scheduled for ourselves. So let's just dig right in. The title of this podcast is You Do You. And Staci, the idea for this actually came from a coaching call I think you had roughly a month or so ago. And so I'm going to have you kick us off. Fill us in. How'd it come up? Just give us some background.
Sounds great. I think this is the first time we've been on as a trio too.
It is.
Yeah, it
I
is.
believe. So this will be fun. So this podcast idea came up, as you said, from a client. I was on a coaching call with 3 individuals, 2 men and 1 female. And we were just talking about goals. And Mary, who told me it was okay if I used her name, said something just out of the blue, not rehearsed or anything, to one of her fellow colleagues that really struck me. And that's when I sent the email to you. And that was, we were setting goals, and we'll call the other person Bob. Bob set a goal, and as soon as he said it, he looked at me through our video conferencing and said, "Is that enough?" Like he wondered if his goal was enough or if he had pushed far enough. And before I could even answer, Mary looked at him, because they happened to be sitting next to each other, and said, "Bob, you do you. You just do you." And I stopped. I said, "Exactly. If you think it's enough, this is something new." And in this case, he was going from something he'd never done before. So at 0, nothing, a notch above that. He didn't need to go 20 notches above or 30 notches above. He was starting something he had never done before and trying it. And she said, "Just you do you." And I smiled, and I wrote it down and circled it. And right after that call, Amanda sent you a note and said, "There's got to be something here. We got to figure out what to do." So I think there's lots of different directions actually we could take it. But today we're going to take it down the comparison route and enoughisms.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, when you sent me that email, I was like, on one hand, it's like, oh yeah, we all go through that. And then on the other hand, I'm like, yay, let's talk about this, because we all go through this. And so, yeah, to your comment there, I actually wrote a post. It's been several months now, but I wrote a post for the Thrive Today app where I called this idea not enoughisms, right? So it's that voice that's in your head that's like, I'm not enough, or I'm not doing enough, or my goals aren't big enough, right? Like it's just constantly comparing and asking, to your client's point, right? Like, is that enough? Like when I set a goal. And So first, I guess I'm curious, like, I know I struggle with this. So my first question is, is that something that you two find yourself struggling with? Or maybe I'm just me and your client, we're just oddballs and and now we find ourselves falling into that comparison trap a little too much.
I would definitely say you're not alone. I know for myself, my whole life it's been, is this enough? Am I doing enough? Or, oh my gosh, XYZ, she's so good at that. I could never be as good as her. So I would be in these two different worlds that were equally as critical and on myself, right? So whether it was, I'm never going to be as good as Amanda at organizing my schedule. Like I can sit in that for a long time because Amanda, I'm always, and I know I always talk about it, and I wish that the podcast listeners could see your face because it's always like, I'm like, man, Amanda is so good at that. But you've given me tools. What's cool about that is that you've given me tools that I'm 10 times better than what I used to be. So I'm able to improve there, which is, I've noticed, taken some of that self-judgment, that internal dialogue off of, like, out of my brain, and made space for other things that I'm able to get done now. And just this like kind of a refreshed confidence. So it's crazy how the people that you are like looking at and comparing yourself to, if you let them, can help you and reshape that internal dialogue rather than letting it stay this negative mindset and shifting it into more of like a pathway of possibility. Like, okay, well, if that's the goal, what can I do better today? So kind of, hey, notch number 1 is better than nothing, rather than feeling like you need to go to notch 20. I'm a new mom. I can get lost in mom guilt, mom comparison. Like, will I breastfeed? Is that okay? Or no, should I only do formula? Or should I do this? Am I wrong? Should I be using cloth diapers? Am I permanently ruining my child for letting her watch the TV every now and then? Like it's nonstop. And I've never met a coaching client that hasn't gotten lost in that some shape or way. Even the guys, right? So, he lives next door. He's got the perfect wife. They're doing all these things. He's got this new equipment, this new truck. So now I've got to go get that new truck, right? Because that means I'm successful. So this is just a really long way of saying, whoever's listening to this, you're not alone. And pretty much every person through MJST, through my coaching at a local gym, through my nutrition coaching that I have come across to and actually gotten into a deep conversation about this with, they're in the same spot. It just is wearing a different color t-shirt.
I would agree. I don't think I've ever met anyone that at some level hasn't compared at some point in their life. And in fact, I was listening to a different podcast about comparison not long ago, and the person that was being interviewed pointed out that it's human nature, right? It's part of our instinct to compare, and some of that was survival mode back before we were living in a time we're living in. So I don't know anyone who doesn't compare, and I absolutely have currently fall into comparison traps and have my entire life. And as I looked back as we were preparing for this, I was thinking about, what do they look like? And some have been themes my entire life, but others have been very much tied to whatever stage or season of life I was in. So I think back to the lovely teenage years or the preteen years where comparison is rampant, right? Everybody's comparing, do you have the right jeans? Do you have the right haircut? Are you in sports or aren't you? Whatever it is. And so at that season of my life, there were comparisons that were happening that no longer impact me today. I still like clothes, but I don't compare the way I did when I was a preteen. Even back to being, in elementary school about what did you get for Christmas? Big topic of conversation for our little girls the last couple of days of what everybody got. They're comparing. Now, it wasn't unhealthy, but they're comparing. So as humans, we're always comparing. The big question is what you do with it. But I also see it showing up for me when I start something new. So when I start a new job or being a new mom, my second child and my first child experiences were very different because I was no longer a new mom. I had already gone through all of those new mom experiences when the second one came along. Now she came with other experiences because no two people are the same or no two babies are the same. But when I start something new, getting married, first couple of years, there's more comparison of how other people are handling marriage versus where I am at now today, being, more almost a decade into marriage. I'm not comparing the way that I used to. So really, it's more about what season of life I'm in and what type of comparisons happening. And I've gotten much better at dealing with it. That's for sure. It's still there though.
Yeah. And I found that misplaced priorities often trigger a lot of comparison too. So, what I mean by that is, I was 6 months pregnant. So obviously I had gained some weight and I was tearing my body apart because I didn't look like these other pregnant women who were all bellies and their thighs didn't get bigger like mine did, or their face didn't get rounder like mine did. So I found myself like haunted by this body image, these body image comparisons. And even looking at other pregnant women or women who weren't pregnant, like, Christina, you're 6 months pregnant. No way you're going to have abs, right? But the more attention that I gave, I just fueled that fire. So the comparison was all day long. And I wish it was something about that doesn't sound so vain, but it honestly was where I was struggling the most through my pregnancies. I didn't feel like myself. And so the universe just kept throwing more and more chances for me to change the dialogue. And it took me quite some time to actually get to a place where I was able to. So that was something that is interesting to me, is that I find that if my priorities aren't aligned with my values, that the universe will throw me opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to either stay in that story, stay and continue that negative dialogue, or reshape it and find what I actually can appreciate, or where I am enough or where I am winning, right? So I don't need abs to have a healthy pregnancy. And I was really blessed that, my pregnancy ended with a beautiful baby girl, right? There's just little things that once my priorities were right, I was able to kind of squash the negative comparison that I was finding myself constantly surrounded by.
How about you, Amanda?
Yeah, I'm just enjoying listening to both of you talk. Something that I found interesting, kind of, Christina, what you said kind of in your first round of thoughts, is how much we struggle with how we compare to others, but we rarely pay attention to how people compare to us. Like, one of my biggest comparison struggles, and it's funny too, Staci, to what you said, is this seems to have become more of a struggle the older I've gotten than when I was younger, but it is around like fitness and body image. And maybe it's also because like a lot of that has become more prevalent in terms of the internet and things like that since, in the last five or so years. But, so I might look at Christina, who is like CrossFit coach and all of this and, eating all of these things. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I suck at all of this. Like, I don't, whatever. Right. But then like, I would never think that Christina would be like, oh, Amanda does this stuff. Right. So it's interesting how we kind of get in our tunnel vision and we're like, I'm so terrible, and realize that no, someone else actually thinks you do something really good, but we're so caught in the comparison game that we can't even see that because we're just so in it. So that was something I thought that, I don't know, just as you guys were talking, that was standing out to me. It's interesting to me how comparison can become unhealthy when it's tied to a shame trigger that you already have, right? And so like, I know for me, a lot of, anytime I'm comparing, it's rooted in like a desire for perfectionism, a desire to be seen as having it all together, right? Like that's my big like base trigger. And so it's just interesting how, we all have those regardless of who you are.
Yeah, definitely. I have a male nutrition client who, when we first started working together, his goal was to be at the same level of body fat as another male in our gym. And we have like the ability to scan that. So, you can get real life information in real time. But I just looked at him and I said, here's the thing. If your goal is to trim body fat, absolutely. Like we can talk about it. And I was like, but if your goal is to be, we'll call him Joe 2.0, then I can't take you on as a client. And he kind of like stepped back and was like surprised that I told him like, yeah, hey, we can work on this, but it's not going to be on those terms. And it was because he was setting himself up to be disappointed, because what happens when he is the same body fat percentage as Joe? From a CrossFit perspective, like your pull-ups, that doesn't mean your pull-ups are better. That doesn't mean your mile is faster. It doesn't mean you don't become a better person. You're literally just a leaner person. And I think it was kind of one of those moments where he didn't even realize like the way that he was coming into a new challenge was with the expectation of being someone else. And what I am really passionate about and what I love that we do at MJST is like, hey, you can come, but like we're going to make you a better you, and we're going to work with you to reach your goals. Like, Amanda, you can't coach me to being a great Staci. I can't be a great Staci, but I can be a better Christina. And that's where, you know, when you are seeking help of a coach, no matter what the capacity is like being really clear on your goals and why. And if you're using someone as inspiration, let them be inspiration, but don't let them be your goal line.
Christina, I think that's you just nailed probably where we can go next with this conversation though. And that is the difference between positive comparison and negative comparison. So if you look at it, Amanda, you like to do this, look at the dictionary definition of words. Comparison is not a negative word. It's become a negative word. And I think social media has had a big role in that in the last decade in particular, because where do we compare the most, right? But comparison in and of itself is not a bad word. We compare books. You know, you're reading 2 books. Do I like this one better or this one? It doesn't mean one is better than the other or worse than the other. It's just, I liked this style better, or I like this music better. Christina, you and I may or may not like the same type of music. That doesn't matter, but if we're having a conversation about it, we're comparing it. It's what we do with the comparison that then writes the story, tells the story for us in our head in particular. And then how we take that story and react to it is how it impacts us in our life. And so if you're comparing with a friend and use inspiration, that's a great thing. I was with a friend over the weekend and I was noting how she was doing certain things, and I could do that. That's really great. I didn't say, oh, I'm terrible because I don't do what she does. I looked at what she did in this instance and said, that's a really good tip. I'm going to try to implement that in my life. And then I did it. That's not a bad thing that I compared how I did something versus how she did it and saw that it was better. But it's what we do with it and then allow ourselves to be who we are. I heard an interesting statistic that I want to bounce off you guys because I think that goes well with what we're saying. Mel Robbins, who provides self-development and books and is a speaker, pointed out in a blip I was listening to not long ago that each of us, and there's science behind this, so she didn't just make this up. Each of us are here today with our exact parents, our exact birthday, our exact DNA. What do you think the chances of that happening is? It's 1 in 400 trillion. It's a 1 in 400 trillion chance that the 3 of us are here made up the way we are, with the personalities that we are, with our DNA structure, with the parents we have, with our birthday, with our hair color, everything. 1 in 400 trillion, yet we compare to each other.
Yeah, I keep going back to, that's why it's so important to really interrogate your story and interrogate, like, when you do find yourself in comparison mode. And it is so hard to do in the moment. Like, I'm not going to say this is easy by any stretch of the imagination, especially I can speak from personal experience when you're like sucked into that. Like, Christina, you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about comparing body image, right? Like, it takes some time to work yourself into a better place. But like, it is so important to say, like, where is this coming from? Like, why am I doing this to myself? 'Cause let's be real. Like, when I'm comparing, I'm doing it to myself. Nobody is like standing there for the most part. Like, no one's standing there going, you suck. Look at so-and-so. They're so awesome. Right. Like, I mean, I'm sure some people had like terrible childhoods where somebody did that, but like as adults, rarely is somebody doing that. So often that's just the dialogue in our head. And so it's just so apparent that like asking yourself, why am I doing this? Where is it coming from? Is just such a critical part of that. Because then you can say, well, you know what? That's my perfectionism coming out to play. Or, well, if that's my thing where, fitness is really important to me. So I'm taking it off the deep end, or, I have this image of what a perfect mom should be. And I don't feel like there's something going on that's driving that instinct to compare yourself to others. And only once you can get in touch with that part, then can we start to say, oh, right, well, maybe that's not quite as realistic as I was thinking it would be. Like, you know what? I am never going to be 5'7" and 100 and whatever pounds with like 8% body fat. Number one, because I'm 5'2". I'm never going to be like 5'7" tall, trim, lean. Like, that's not going to happen. And so, like, continue to compare to people who do look like that. Like, number one, it doesn't serve me. Number two, like, where is that coming from? Well, I have all these insecurities in all these other places, right? So now that I go, okay, here's where those insecurities come from. Now I can have a better approach to tackle those, because going from 5'2" to 5'7" is never going to happen. So yeah, I know that story is just so important.
Another thing that you can do, and I'll use a business example for this one because we've talked a lot about personal. I mentioned earlier about being new at something. A lot of times we fall into comparison. You're in a new company, you're not going to know everything that someone who's been there 20 years knows, or you're in a new role that there's a lot of tenure to other experienced people in. You're not going to know everything, but you tend to compare to them. I know I fell into that. I think back to early on when I started the government relations role that I had. Most of the group that I was with and interacting with daily had 20 years experience or more. And I was constantly comparing to them my knowledge of an issue, or how I was working with people, or what relationships I had. And it wasn't until I took it to someone else, a mentor, and I started talking to them about, okay, this is where I'm at. Why am I not at that level? What do I need to do to get that level? Where they had me take a step back and say, one, is it realistic? You've been on the job a year. They've been here for 20 years, and it's a relationship business. And two, what are you going to do to get to that level when you're 20 years in? And now I'm 20 years almost in. That's weird to say, but now I'm at that level where I was. And yeah, if I would have chilled out and not been so hard on myself, really, it was, again, Amanda, back to what you said, it was all me. It was my internal dialogue and my expectations. But if I look back at the younger version of me and I dig into it, the reason I cared so much and had that internal dialogue was that I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to live up to the expectations not only I had set for myself, but that I had for my growth, that I had for my future. And I was so passionate about that I got into the comparison shame spiral versus allowing myself some self-compassion and letting myself learn from those that did have more experience, for me in this instance. And I think that happens in business a lot, not just for when you're new at something, but you compare businesses and why is that business doing this and we're not. If you do something positive with it, you say, okay, they're doing this and we're not, and we should be, let's make it happen. That's positive. If you say they're doing this and we're not, and we should be, and you turn it into a why didn't we think of that? What's wrong with us? You've now created a negative comparison.
Yeah. And I think it also brings a good point around, if you're that person that's 20 years in role, how to interact with that person that's brand new. Mm-hmm. Right. Because there was probably someone that looked at you at some point and was like, how do you not know this? And the answer was probably because I've been on the job for 6 hours. Like that's why I don't know this yet. So right. For anyone listening to this that, maybe is that more experienced person or that highly successful individual, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with that success? Are you going to sit in it and build a shrine to yourself until you're irrelevant? Because you'll get surpassed someday. Let's be real. Or are you going to take these gifts that you've been given and help someone else figure out how to do the same thing and find their own way to do it and find their own success in that? And again, don't compare. Like, it's so funny because I guarantee there was someone that was 20 years enrolled that was looking at you like, oh my gosh, she is so young and has so much energy. And I am so tired,
And now I'm 20 years in.
Well, yeah. And now you know what it feels like to be that person with the new, young whippersnapper coming into role, right? Like, it's so crazy how the way we view other people can really trigger that negative internal dialogue constantly. Like, that's the thing that is so important to remember is like, there's one person you're never going to get away from, and that's yourself. So it's the daily practice, the daily commitment of, okay, here's how I'm going to handle this because it's going to happen, right? If you get on Instagram, you're going to see someone with a perfectly clean house, and that might trigger you and the fact that you're not tidy. Or if you walk into a board meeting, you might hear a baller presentation by a new sales associate, and you're, sitting back thinking like, that's awesome. Why didn't I think of that? Just back to your point. Why didn't I think of that? Shifts it from this pathway of possibility to this pathway of limitations in an instant. So it's that daily grind, that minute by minute commitment to really thinking and paying attention to the dialogue going on in your head, so that you don't get caught up in this negative spiral that then keeps you up at night. And you might not even know why you're up at night, but it's because you've spent so much time earlier in the day living in this negative comparison or this not enoughism that now it's impacting something that you feel like you've moved past it. Well, chances are you haven't. Because that's one thing. Negative internal dialogue will always find its way back to you in a physical way. It's never just a thought that floats away in the moment until you give it the time that it needs to really be processed and ask yourself, is it true? Is this really real? Is this what's actually happening? Am I really terrible? And I guarantee the further you dig, the more you'll realize that that's not true.
Yeah.
And I am okay.
Yeah. And I hear, so I've heard things like, first I need to chill out, right? Like that's step one, like calm the heck down. I've heard just being aware of like, hey, what is this? What's happening? Like something's happening, even if it's not even what is it, but like, oh, hey, I am having a reaction to seeing this Instagram picture. I'm having a reaction. Like that can be huge as well. I heard, making it a daily practice to ask like, are these thoughts in my head true? Are they reality? And kind of digging into it that way, asking yourself where this is coming from. What are other strategies that, maybe whether it's for yourself or like if you're coaching someone who is finding themselves really caught up in that trap, how do you work through it?
One that comes to mind right now, I've been digging into the brain and how it literally haven't been digging into the brain, obviously, but digging into how the brain works and how our neural pathways are created and all of the science behind how our brain works. And it's just fascinating. One of the things that in one of the books I'm reading right now focused on the subconscious and the role that plays in how we think about things and how we view the world. But one of the tips that was from that book, when you get in the comparison, and you can use it in other areas too, is rather than being mad at someone for having something better. So they got the promotion and I didn't. Or the boss talks to them more than they talk to me. Or you can fill in the blank, your Instagram example, Christina, where someone's house looks cleaner on Instagram, which by the way was one blip in time for one split second. So don't always take that for what it's worth either. But whatever it is, rather than getting mad about it or angry or sad or whatever that negative feeling is, when you start to feel it, stop and wish them well. Turn your feeling toward that into a positive. And it feels weird at first. It really does. Since I started reading this book, I've been practicing it myself. It feels strange to just say, wow, they went on a trip that I really would have wish we could go on over Christmas. And I wish I would have been on the beach or whatever it was, because that seems to be what I've been seeing lately. And instead of going down the path of, oh, we need to save money, why aren't we doing that? What I would have done before, I stopped myself and I said, good for them. I'm so happy for them. And I meant it, by the way. That's the other key. So you have to mean it. You wish them well. Somebody at work got a promotion, be the first one to go up to them and wish them well. Because you may somewhere down the road do something that they really wanted to do, and you're going to want them to wish you well. And they may not ever wish you well. It doesn't matter, because you're taking the positive road and you're going to wish them well. And that's going to pay dividends for yourself down the road, or and at that moment, because you're now taking something that would have been a negative spiral, maybe ruined your day, and turning it positive.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm so glad that you pointed out, like, and mean it, because I can hear myself getting a little snarky. Oh, good for you. And kind of moving on with my day and not necessarily meaning it. So really taking a minute to actually wish them well. Something that I've offered to some of my coaching clients, and something that I practice, and it's a practice because I'm not perfect at it, but is asking, why is that important? Once the trigger comes up. So whatever the comparison might be, if it's in the workplace, man, they're always getting celebrated by our manager. Why is that important? And then realizing that maybe there's an opportunity to give some feedback around what my needs are as an employee, as well as being aware of the fact that maybe my work isn't living up to that same expectation that theirs is. So what can I do? Where is the appropriate effort on my behalf? Because what I want to make sure that people that are listening to this don't walk away thinking is what we're saying is that when you say you do you, that it means you stop caring about what other people think or what they see or how you interact with them. You do you is not this mindset of you who literally only care about yourself and screw everyone else. Like, that is not where this is coming from. But this is having the confidence to know that I am so committed to being the best Christina that I can be, that when I get lost in that negative self-talk, that those negative thoughts that are triggered by comparison, that I have a moment to stop, breathe, and ask myself, why is that important? And if seeing someone that's really fit on Instagram is triggering me, then there's something that I'm either not doing or not addressing. Now, just to be completely honest, like, when I worked through it while I was pregnant, it was because I was worried that my husband wasn't going to be attracted to me anymore. Like, that's what it boiled down to. It didn't boil down to the fact that abs are awesome, but so are babies. So, it wasn't this like terrible self-talk of like, oh, Christina, you're obese or anything like that. But it was just like, I want to make sure my husband still is attracted to me. And I never opened that conversation up to have with him until after I worked through it. And it took me months to work through it. So can you imagine the impact it had on our relationship during that time? If in my subconscious, I wasn't even aware of the fact that I was worried he wasn't attracted to me. So I literally wore his robe all the time. So it's just like, we're going to get really real about it. That was what was going on for me. So taking that time to ask, why is this important? And really give yourself the space to dig through it. And maybe you ask yourself that over and over and over again to get to the true root. But that's something to take into consideration, is that doesn't mean you dismiss everyone else's opinion. It doesn't mean you dismiss expectations, but it does mean you have the confidence to pause and dig to the real root for yourself so that you can be the best authentic self that you are, rather than trying to morph yourself and mold yourself into someone else.
I like that point, Christina, a lot. And I had on my notes as we were preparing for this, that it also doesn't mean that you do you get to be negative and be a bully. You can't, I could see people saying, well, me being me is crabby. Me being me is a bully. Me being me is kind of lazy. I don't care. That's not what we're talking about. So I'm glad you made that point, because the whole premise of what we're talking about here is to be the best version of you being you, and bringing that up to a version, and recognizing that if you're using comparison in a negative light, are you prohibiting yourself from being the best version of you, one of those 1 in 400 trillion of you that's here right now on earth contributing? And if the answer is you're using it in a negative way, then like you said, dig into it. If you're using it in a positive way, keep comparing. If you're getting inspired by others and saying, I want to emulate something, I think I have a talent that can complement what they do, or I could take myself to a new level because I could see myself doing whatever it is, go for it. As long as the comparison is resulting in something that's healthy and productive and helping you become a better version of who you are.
As we've been talking, it's making me think a lot about the difference between growth versus fixed mindset. So, right. So fixed mindset, I'll start there first, right? Is this idea that I am either good or bad, right or wrong based on my actions. Right. And so, I chose to have a slice of chocolate cake today, so I am bad. I screwed up. I have no self-control, right? Like I am bad because of this thing. Versus, or I'll flip it around. I ate the salad today, so I am good. I'm so wonderful, right? Like versus a growth mindset, which would say, you know what, I had the chocolate cake today. That's okay. Right? Like on my journey, I get to decide where that fits. Right. So maybe tomorrow I won't have that. Or maybe I say, you know what, like that was what satisfied me in the moment, and I will make a different choice or maybe whatever, like it's always, I feel like a growth mindset is this decision does not make me good, bad, right, wrong. It's a piece on the journey, and I always have room to make a different decision next time, or change course, or learn from this, or whatever. And maybe my example there wasn't really great, but I always, like, when it comes to comparison, I think that is a piece that comes into when the negative comes in, is this very much from a fixed mindset place, right? Like I'm good, bad, right, or wrong versus, you know what, they're doing something different than me. Maybe I could be where they are. I'm just not there yet. Right. And maybe I might have to make some different decisions to get to where they are. Or maybe I might decide, once I see those different decisions I would have to make, I don't actually want to be where they are. Right. That's totally, totally fair too. And so if I think that's something, like, as we say, what are some strategies? It's like, how can I cultivate that growth mindset more often? How can I keep coming back to, I might not be there today, but I could be, right? Or I'm just not there yet. Or, I think about this a lot. So I've started doing more yoga, and like I have certain practices where I'm really frustrated because I can't do certain things. Like I don't have the flexibility, I don't have the mobility, it hurts, like right. And so sometimes I come away from those classes like just really disappointed because clearly like this must not be for me because I can't do it, which is very fixed mindset-y, versus like, you know what, today was hard, I will get there, which is much more of a growth mindset standpoint. So that's a strategy I think I play with a lot too, is like, not there today, but that doesn't mean I won't ever be there if I put in the work and keep going.
Yeah. And finding something to celebrate, right? Like if you find yourself leaning more onto that negative self-talk pretty consistently. So yoga is a great example. Today sucked because I couldn't get in that pose because my arms don't bend that way, right? Like that, you can absolutely leave that way thinking that, but did you break a sweat? Did you have the best shavasana ever because you finally got to relax because you worked so freaking hard? Like that's my favorite part. Yoga, but it's finding that victory right at the end of, hey, I didn't accomplish everything I set out to do, but here's what I did nail out of the ballpark, or here's what did go well. And that's something that when I hear friends tell me like things repeatedly about what's going wrong and kind of like in this negative negative Nancy or negative mindset where it's just like, wah, wah, wah. I guess that's Debbie Downer from Saturday Night Live. But when they get kind of stuck in that, and I'm like, okay, cool. What went right today? What happened that's awesome? And if they struggle to find that answer, then that's where we know the true work is. Going to another yoga class where you're going to beat yourself up isn't the answer, but going to another yoga class to try again, that is.
I'm thinking about our listeners and the possibility that we have two groups. We probably have one group that hasn't thought about comparison much. Doesn't mean they don't compare, but they haven't put much thought into the reaction to it or how it impacts them both mentally and from a physiological standpoint, what it feels like to have comparison. And then we probably have another group that saw the title and said, oh, I want to hear what this is all about because I do it all the time. What do I do? My message to the group that's never thought about it goes along with what Amanda just said of how do you move from that fixed mindset because you probably don't even know what you're doing it, but now you listen to this and you're going to be more aware just because you listen to it, of how do you stop yourself in your tracks. And it's going to be likely a lifelong process, right? I don't think any of us is ever going to completely never compare at any point in our life, but now you have awareness of it. So what are you going to do with that awareness? And how do you move from I'm going to go into a spiral to, oh, I'm starting to go negative. How can I look at this a different way? And then the group that looked at this because they feel like they do it all the time. Christina, to me, a lot of what you said about now, how do you, and Amanda too, how do you dig into the layers? I was talking about peeling the onion back. I just had a conversation at lunch today with a friend and I said, I peeled the onion back and here's what I figured out. How do you peel the onion back to your comparison and dig into why am I really being triggered by this? Why do I care? And taking because you already have the awareness that you're doing it, taking that self-awareness to the next level. And then to that group, that first group that I mentioned, you're going to get there someday. Don't forget what we talked about. Peel it back. Figure out why you care, and then you can address it. And you also have the opportunity to turn it positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking along this strategy line of how do you deal with it. I don't know if this is for everybody, but I know me in particular, like I need from time to time, like a friend, a cheerleader, a something who is just like, Amanda, knock it off. Like, you are fine. You're doing fine. You're great in all of these areas. Why are you spending so much time and energy here? Like, to some extent, that's what we do in coaching from time to time, right? Is to just be like, hey, dude, chill out. You are doing great. Like, but I know that's just like, if we're talking pure strategy, if you're the type of person, just like identify who is that person in your life who you're like, okay, I'm going down a rabbit hole I don't need to go down. Please shake me out of it. Because sometimes you need that outside perspective.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And to take it to another level, if you're finding that comparison is really impacting you in a very negative way in your life, and even if you have that person and it's still not working, get help. Seek out a therapist, seek out a counselor, whoever that might be, a spiritual advisor, whatever makes sense for you in your life, because comparison can get to the level that's really damaging mentally. And that can impact your whole well-being. So if that's something you're struggling with as someone who has battled depression in my past and dealt with some of this through that, I encourage you to just seek out help, because there's counselors, there's therapists, there's other people out there that can help you work through it in a really positive way and do it in a way that makes sense for you. So I would agree, but having an accountability partner, a comparison accountability partner is an excellent thing to do, because lots of times you'll go, oh, you're right. Or we'll talk it out and they'll say, I struggle with the same thing and here's what I'm thinking. And we're all kind of in the same boat. And you go, oh, I didn't think of that. So I would agree with that.
And sometimes that person, like, especially if they know you, can be the one to be like, you don't actually really care about that. Like, like you don't want to be in a bodybuilding competition. Why are you comparing yourself to Christina? Like you like pizza too much. Like, let's just be real. Like sometimes that's the person I need, is just to be like, stop. Like you pretending like you care, but you don't actually care. So quit comparing yourself to something that's not even that important to you, except when this one person is around. Like it's so silly.
It's that misplaced priority, right? Like if I am really focused on what I'm not, I will find so much evidence to gather that is showing like how bad I really am not XYZ. But if I ask myself, is it important? And 9 times out of 10, like, no, it's not, because my priorities are actually aligned with this. Like, I want to sweat once a day to feel better. I'm not training for a marathon, or I'm not training for this. Same thing at work. Like if someone's getting celebrated in sales all the time and you're not a salesperson, don't take it personally that you're not getting celebrated for sales. Like there, again, might be opportunity that you need some more words of affirmation. And that's a conversation you can have with your boss, but there is no reason to get lost in comparing yourself to someone from a different department who's just nailing it out of the ballpark when those aren't your roles and responsibilities. So just staying consistent in what your responsibilities are and what your priorities are, and using comparison in a positive way to light that fire rather than burn you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much yes. So much like the raise the roof emoji. So okay, so we talked a lot about strategies, and honestly, like I knew we could talk for like hours. So I'm like, okay, we got to lasso this in here. Bring us back. So I'm curious from each of you, how do you determine what good enough means for you? Like what is it that a goal or a benchmark has to have for you to go, you know what, that's okay. It might not be somebody else's, but it's mine and I'm cool with that. I guess I can start, because one thing I was thinking about, Christina, as you talked there, is I'm really working hard to get to the point where I know I have hit the sweet spot when I can feel like I can defend it to somebody who may think it's not good enough. Like, so if somebody were to be like, well, you know what? Why aren't you in a gym 5 days a week? Why aren't you eating salads for every meal? For me to be able to say, this is why, this is what's important to me. And to confidently be able to say that without the comparison, to not like shrink back and go, oh, well, maybe I should be having more salads, or maybe I should be in the gym, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, cause that would be my instinct a lot of the time, would be like, oh, I'm terrible. I should be doing those things. But like, that's for me, one of those things where it's like, okay, I've hit the sweet spot because I can tell you, this is why that's my goal. And I'm okay with that. And it doesn't matter what you say. So I don't know. That's like one of my first, like, that's how I measure it. I'm curious what comes up for you guys.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like thinking through the SMART goal structure. And it sounds so simple, but it's just so true and relevant. So is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it realistic? Do you actually want to do it? So that's what I always ask my coaching clients when we first start, and they set these goals that when they talk about it, they're like, oh, I just felt like I kind of had to do that. And I'm like, that's not a goal then. That's you trying to look good on paper. Come back with what you would want to do. And if you don't want to do anything, that's okay too. So it's, is it measurable? Is it realistic? And is it authentic to you? Is just really something that's important to know, like, is your enough?
I would agree. The SMART goals came to mind for me too, Christina, as you asked the question, Amanda, and the realistic component is one I check myself on a lot. And it's not realistic doesn't mean I'm not pushing myself. Realistic means, does it actually align with my talents? It's easy to get into comparison in the professional sense of looking at people who appear to be doing these great big things. I would not be good at them, but I want to do what they're doing, but I wouldn't be good at them. Let's be realistic about it. Or to set targets for the year. Lots of times we're talking about sales targets and individual sales targets. You want to push yourself enough, but if you're going to set something that's not even realistically achievable, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And so a lot of times I check myself against is it realistic, and can I actually achieve it based on my talents, my skill sets, whatever it is, depending on what we're talking about. On the personal side, again, I go back to my values of why am I comparing? And then how does that align with who I really am and who I believe I, not only am today, but what I believe that I want to be? And does this even make sense?
Yeah, those are all really good. Just as you were talking, one of the other things that I think about too is, for me, a big thing is sustainability. And so, like, I understand people set goals kind of short term, either just because it would be really cool to achieve them, or they want to push themselves for like a, short, or like, yeah, just like a short term. But like, for me, a good goal is one based more in habits than in like big accomplishments. And I think we found this in a lot of clients too, is like, I don't know, maybe this isn't the case for everybody. I know some people are like super goal driven. Like, if anybody's heard Mark on this podcast before, like, he is a super like set a target, go out and knock that target out of the water. And I think that is awesome. I don't operate that way. Like, it's not really inspirational or motivating to me to have like big targets, but it is really like the idea of getting to a point where I was like stretching or doing yoga for like 10 to 20 minutes a day, like, that's sustainable for me. Or to be to a point where it's like, I am always 4 weeks ahead on podcasts. Like, that's something that is sustainable. And maybe you guys use the word realistic as kind of the same idea. But I think a lot about sustainability in terms of, how can this not just be like a one-time goal that I'm achieving, but how can it be something that actually brings like long-term value to my life, to my behaviors, to my mindset, that sort of thing.
Amanda, I was doing like a hallelujah dance in my mind when you were saying those things. So what I always encourage people around is like a goal with an end date isn't really a goal, because it's not changing your habits. That doesn't mean that so let me break it down, and we'll use running as an example. So their goal is to start running, and they're going to run a half marathon in August. So they go along the program, they're starting to do their running, because they're experiencing the health benefits from running, getting out in the open. Maybe their mindset's getting better because they're spending that time with themselves, getting out of the crazy everyday madness. And then they run that race, and then that's it. What happens after the race? If you just stop running and you no longer are feeling that outlet, then did that goal really serve you? Was it really a goal? And what was your why behind it? So I always tell people that there's no end date to self-improvement. So yes, you might have a benchmark, which is run a marathon, but the why shouldn't just be, I'm going to run a marathon. Are you better for that? No, but your health might be better from the action of the practice of running. My daughter's just going to chime in. She agrees that there's no end date. So we're in January, the beginning of January. So many people are starting 30-day challenges for nutrition. And it's like, man, you're going to eat every day. Please don't only eat a certain way for 30 days and think that that's going to fix things. Let's talk about the habits that, maybe the 30-day challenge is a kickstart for eliminating bad habits that you have of emotional eating or something like that. But get really clear on the why and make sure it's tied to a sustainable habit, and just use those certain dates as benchmarks, not end dates.
And I would build on that too, is ask yourself whose standard enough is. Are you measuring your enough against other people, or are you measuring enough against where you were a year ago, or where you want to be in a year? If you're measuring against other people, I go back to the 1 in 400 trillion. If you're enough, I will never be enough if I compare myself to how Amanda schedules. We've talked about it once in here already. She's a rock star. I honestly will never be enough. I don't have that skill set. If I'm measuring against her, I'm not ever going to be enough. But if I'm measuring and it's something I want to improve on, and I'm measuring against where I was 6 months ago and where I want to be in 6 months, that's a different story. So I think you need to be careful about who's enough. Are you measuring against your own standards, or are you comparing your whatever it is you're focusing on with everyone, what are perceived everyone else's standards? And perception is the key word there.
Absolutely. And we can keep going forever and ever, but I think that is a wonderful note to end that part of the conversation on. So before we finish the recording here, I'm asking a new question here in 2019 to round out our podcast episodes. Christina, I'll start with you. So Christina says she's got a mini ticking time bomb on her lap, which is her daughter woke up from her nap. So she joined us for the recording. But Christina, what is going on that you're super excited about right now?
Yeah, I am back to training. So I'm in like actually training. So I'm super excited. I mean, I'm 1 weekend. So when I say back to it, it's super, super fresh. But I am stoked to start training 5 days a week again. Now that I've taken the time to rehab from childbirth and all that good stuff. So that's something that I'm just super, super excited about. I'm starting a new gymnastics program. So that is what I'm currently up to. Yeah. Amanda studies gymnastics, and I'm not the most graceful. So we're going to see how this new adventure goes.
We'll have to talk more. We'll have to talk more. I'll just leave it at that for the podcast audience. Awesome. Very cool. Good for you. Staci, what about you? What's really exciting right now?
Amanda, your face lit up when you heard gymnastics. I have lots that I'm looking forward to this year, but from a professional standpoint, I'll go there. Honestly, coming on board with JST as a contract coach and working with clients here over the last few months, and then also looking ahead to the next year. I'm excited about it. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's just a lot of opportunity to impact people in a positive way, and that gets me really excited.
Awesome. Well, I know our team is really excited to have you join us. So we're looking forward to where that can go. So very good. Thank you, ladies, for coming on the show. As always, we always have really good conversation. And I know this will not be the last time that we talk to either of you. So we will talk to you sometime in the future. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, and it helps other people find the show. On that same note, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend. As always, if you're looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social networks. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.